Okay, we've been covering this renewable energy story for several years now, so tonight we're pulling together excerpts from various agenda programs for a closer look at Ontario's Green Energy Act. Let's take you back to the Samsung deal, which was heralded as a cornerstone for Ontario's green energy development. Proponents claim the deal attracted $7 billion of much-needed investment here, but critics suggested taxpayers got hosed because the government sole sourced the contract rather than put it out for tender. Here's the economics of green energy.
I think that what we need to think about here is that it's not just about Samsung coming in, that this legislation is really groundbreaking for North America, and it does more than just produce electricity. It's the Green Energy and Green Economy Act, and it doesn't just create industrial investment or new manufacturing jobs, although I think this is a key tool in the reindustrialization of North America, and specifically Ontario, and looking at what's becoming our Rust Belt, and investing money into the automotive sector and various other players who are losing jobs anyways. This is going to create new jobs there. But this is about the average Ontarian, people like you and I and the rest of us here in the room and out there around Ontario getting into the game. This isn't just about the jobs that are going to be lost, like the doctors who maybe don't have as many patients to look after because 9,000 patients of premature deaths caused by pollution in Ontario don't exist anymore. This is about every Ontarian getting into the game. Every dollar invested locally results in a 3 to 10 times multiplier. 3 times to 10 times. You put $1 in, you get 3 to 10 times the money back in your local economy. We need to drive the local investment and drive the local opportunities. And if others want to come in and put their money into Ontario, then great opportunity for us.
Okay, Norm, let's start to unpack some of this here. This is a very successful consortium with a lot of money, and they got $7 billion and they want to spend it in this province. How can that be bad?
Well, it can be bad if we're paying them so much to do it that we end up losing money.
But we see what we're paying. We're paying $450 some odd million to lever $7 billion in investment.
No. That's the amount we're paying on top of the feed-in tariff rates. The feed-in tariff rates, as you so correctly put to the minister, are several times the value of the electricity. If you add reasonable carbon taxes or other emissions taxes or tradable permits or whatever to the nasty electricity, you still have trouble closing that gap. You certainly aren't going to close the gap to solar. There's just no way that solar electricity is worth that much money. Look, I'm excited about the future of solar. I am really excited. I think solar is going to be the game changer in electricity, but it's going to be the game changer because companies like NanoSolar and others are working on 5 cent a kilowatt hour electricity, not because they're working on 80 cent a kilowatt hour rooftop collectors or 40 odd cents a kilowatt hour Samsung.
So too much government investment, too much subsidy, you don't like the looks of that?
You don't get cheap solar by announcing that you're #1 in subsidizing expensive solar.
Tom, come with that.
Well, the first thing you do is you have an intelligent feed-in tariff that lowers over time. And no one's kidding anybody. The feed-in tariff primes the pump. This isn't the final solution to decarbonizing our economy. This is the beginning, the first domino of many that need to fall. There are lots of companies out there. Morgan Solar looking to produce cheap solar, and those innovations are coming. But Margaret Thatcher addressed the UN General Assembly in 1989 and warned us that this was the single greatest threat facing our civilization, climate change. It's a long time ago. The market has not solved the problem. The government needs to intercede and needs to intercede with strong, coherent signals that this sector will go. And I think the feed-in tariff is priming the pump. It's not the final solution. It gets things going.
Randall, you heard the minister say that for once he's proud to be an Ontarian because we're at the forefront. We're leading this green revolution and the production of green energy. We're making it happen here within the boundaries. He's happy about that. What's not to be happy about there?
Well, if it were true, I guess it'd be something to be proud of. But how can he ignore the fact that we're not leading at all? We're trying to catch up now. If you look at the state of wind power in Germany, for example, Denmark, many European countries, they're way ahead of us. It's not like we're inventing something new here. And I keep hearing from a couple of your panelists that this shows that the Green Energy Act is really working. To me, it shows just the opposite. We've brought in these feed-in tariffs that have been discussed so far in the show. They're quite substantial, but still that wasn't enough for Samsung to come here. They needed 2 more inducements. They needed the money we described, and they needed to be put first in queue for transmission. Without those 2 giveaways, Green Energy Act didn't work. I mean, really what this tells me is this very elaborate Green Energy Act, even at those very high rates, still isn't enough to attract major players to come to Ontario. I mean, this is very typical of this government and of Ontario The minister tells us, well, it's an incentive. You know, we do incentives all the time. That's called having a branch planned economy. We just got burned on that in the auto industry. We learned nothing from it. Now we're just going to give handouts to other companies to come here.
Okay, let's
What's the matter with Canadian innovation?
In that chair, Satinder, about 3.5 weeks ago, sat the 24th Premier of the province of Ontario. Let's play a little snippet of what he had to say on that which we are discussing right this very second. Michael, roll tape, please.
It's one thing for the private sector to do its shtick in the global economy and to be supported in that with a capable workforce. But if you get the private sector and a capable workforce and a government in sync, well, now you're talking an unbeatable combination. And then all you've got to do is pick a lane. You can't be best at everything. So, for example, we've decided in Ontario that notwithstanding the uncertainty that prevails in the global economy, there are a couple of things of which we are absolutely certain. One is the price of oil and gas, Steve, it's only going one way, and that's up. And there's something we know about technologies in general and renewable energy technologies in specific. They're coming down. Flat screen TVs came down in price. Cell phones came down in price. Renewable technologies are coming down in price. We want to be at the head of that curve.
He went on to say, you want to play, you got to pay. Does Ontario have to do this, Finn, in order to get noticed?
No, does it have to do it? Of course not. Implicit in here, and indeed explicit in the Premier's comments, is the idea of picking a winner of a technology or a route, and that's extremely problematic in principle for any government. Doubly problematic in this case. Absolutely, the price of flat screen TVs has come down. The price of photovoltaic capacity has fallen through the floor. The world is awash in solar panel or solar technology production creation. It's already been invented. There is a very, very difficult row to hoe in trying to make a market in solar technology, just to pick one. So it's an odd one to focus Ontario's efforts on, and not a particularly stable one to build an electricity base from.
In fairness to him, it's one industry, and I'm glad he is focusing on it, and I think he's picked a lane, if I could put it that way, and he's doing well. But he's also trying to expand markets here too as well. He's spending a lot of time over in India. He's spending time in China. He's looking at trying to do things to expand investment both here in Ontario and trade abroad, which is what we need to be doing in this province in order to create the jobs that we need for the future. I think he's done a very good job at that, and I think he's again been very forward-looking on that, and for that he should be given good marks.
The one flaw, though, I see, I guess, in the green energy strategy, and the Premier touched upon it, he talked about being able to tap into the creative energy of the public sector and the private sector. In this particular case, he's actually, in terms of green energy, he's prohibited the public sector from engaging. Like OPG, for example, which has got a lot of the brain power in energy in this country.
Ontario Power Generation.
Ontario Power Generation. They've been prohibited from bidding on any of these contracts and bringing the technology that they've got already built into the system to bring it to bear on solar energy or wind power energy.
Can you give us a sense of how many of these new jobs that are being created, either through Samsung building new factories here or the smaller operations, what percentage of these jobs either are or will be, do you suspect, unionized?
Well, that depends, I would imagine, on the nature of, like Samsung. If it builds a factory, clearly there'll be a union will move in to try to organise them. If it's the farmers, for example, who are through the feed-in tariffs, you know, it's very unlikely that you're going to try and organise farmers. So it depends really on if you get co-ops in place, for instance, like they've got in Denmark. Possible that we would unionise those. We'll do our best, Steve, I can assure you that much, to unionise and raise the wages to the highest possible level. No doubt about it.
I have no doubt about that, Sid. I was going to go to Brian with that next. If Sid is extremely successful in unionizing as many of these, what was the latest estimate, 30,000 clean, green jobs that are on the way because of the priorities of the McGuinty government, 50,000, I'm being told in my ear right now, is the latest projection. How will that impact what the Premier is trying to do?
Well, if the costs outweigh the market benefits of being here, or the tax benefits, or the energy benefits, or all these other things that corporations take into account, then they won't be here except on a minimal basis, and that's a fact of life. I mean, Ontario is competing in the global economy, and the fact is that companies weigh all that. But there are other reasons that they may choose to be here anyway. They may choose to be here because their overall costs are lower, their tax base may be lower. Their cost of materials may be lower, and their access to the U.S. market may be more desirable to be here.
And a better educated, trained workforce.
Yeah. I mean, we're attracting workers because of our healthcare. We're attracting workers because of our infrastructure, as much as it still needs work. We're attracting because of our education system. I mean, ICICI Bank, as an example from India, set up here, no subsidies, no anything like that, because we have a critical mass in terms of financial institutions. It's a good example of the type of businesses we ought to be going after, particularly here in the Greater Toronto area.
I think that's a terrific example, because what you've got is a critical mass, as you said, of skills, of people, and of opportunities that businesses will invest in, will choose to locate their employment in.
But the point is without government subsidy.
Without government subsidy. In this case, we're choosing one. We're choosing a very crowded green lane. There's hardly a jurisdiction in North America or in Europe that hasn't jumped on the green energy
But banking isn't new.
It's
these
not.
industries, these green industries, are relatively new. Do you have to help them as a result?
Of course not.
Of course. Donald, let me try this with you, and then we're going to go around the table and get everybody in on this. Part of the idea the McGuinty government told us behind going so hard onto this Green Energy Act and offering the kind of public subsidies we are was to create a business here, was to create a new industry, was to be huge players in what they believe to be a burgeoning green energy market here in the province of Ontario. Is this in fact happening? Are there new and more jobs being created, green jobs, as a result of this policy?
I think the answer is mixed. Are some green jobs being created? Yes. But the flip side of that is, are jobs being destroyed? And the problem is that when governments take taxpayer money or electricity consumer money and spend it to subsidize a particular activity, a manufacturing plant or a type of generation, when the government spends the money, we can see a factory being built, people being hired, looks like job creation. But we, the consumers, we, the taxpayers, no longer have the money. If they spend $100 million of our money, we ourselves are going to spend $100 million less. And that means we'll spend less on discretionary food and clothing and entertainment and whatever we spend our discretionary dollars on.
Are you saying it's a wash? We're going to create this many jobs, but we'll lose the same number of jobs?
My starting point would be, yes, governments don't create jobs, they move them around. They move them from all around to the place where the minister cut the ribbon. They move them from 2 years from now, when we have to pay back the debt, to today when we hire the workers to start out.
Let me hear from Tom on this. What evidence do you see so far which suggests to you either more or fewer jobs are being created in green or outside of green?
We're getting a few. We're getting a few, and they're interesting. We're getting some of these manufacturers setting up factories for assembling equipment for inverters, right? When the power comes off the solar panels, it has to be converted into a form of electricity that's suitable to inject into the grid. And you need a little box to do it. And
an
it's
inverter.
Inverter, it's called. And it's a high-tech little device, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into it.
And we make those.
And we're just starting to make some. And some of the manufacturers have been setting up shop, and some of them have been able to. They make an announcement, and they're delivering. They got a factory set up, and they're delivering within 6 weeks. These guys are really fast.
Is this a business that we can sell around the world?
But what's going on here? Keep an eye on it. They can set it up really fast. They can also take it down really fast, and they'll move to the next jurisdiction where somebody comes along with another policy, and they have it'll be a Buy Ohio instead of a Buy Ontario plan, and they'll just move from one trade controlled jurisdiction to the next.
So you're not impressed?
We're getting a few construction jobs. The electricity business is one of the most capital-intensive elements of the economy. Okay, the number of the millions of dollars to create a job in the power sector is a worse ratio than in almost any other sector you look at.
Let me find out from Gord Miller. What's the evidence that you see which would suggest whether we're getting our money's worth from this new Green Energy Act?
Well, I mean, we've heard it from. We are creating jobs. There are the inverter jobs. There's various metal shops that are assembling the infrastructure for these solar panels. There's, I believe sorry, I've lost the name of the steel company in Sault Marie anymore. It used to be
Algoma. Oh, it's SR now. Isn't
SR,
it?
right? Yeah. SR is, I believe, making the steel for the columns for the wind turbines. I mean, it really is happening. I'm a little distressed that we can't. Economist says we can't. The government can't create jobs. I'm not sure why we spend all those billions in stimulus money, because that frightens me a little bit. But
we're creating jobs now and taking them away later when they have to pay the taxes to
Fair enough.
refund the money.
But I think that there are real jobs happening. I mean, you know, Tom's raised some specter of future events that may or may not pan out, but you can't deny that people in Ontario are working in this business. I was at a meeting in this controversy about the microfit with regard to solar installers. There were hundreds of people there, and these are people that have, you know, put their money on the line and trying to make their living in the solar business.
You wouldn't think there was anything particularly controversial about the green energy aspects of the Act. Shuttering coal-fired plants seems like a great idea for the environment, but does this mean the province will become increasingly reliant on other, less appealing forms of energy generation? We begin with then Minister of Energy Brad Dogood and what he saw as the environmental virtues of Ontario's long-term energy plans.
Well, what this is all about is laying out for Ontario families where our energy sector is going to go over the next 20 years, what the costs will be, what the benefits will be for Ontario families. And just in a nutshell, absolutely, by the end of 2014, we will be completely out of coal with certainty, and this plan provides that certainty. What that means, it's like taking 7 million cars off the roads. And when you think about that in Ontario, there's about 8 million cars in Ontario. So it's like almost taking every car in Ontario off the roads. Huge in terms of cleaning air.
When I hear the words government and certainty in the same sentence, you'll forgive me, I gotta probe a bit here, but you know, the Premier did promise to have all the coal-fired generating stations shut down by the year 2007. Now it's 2014. He realized the earlier promise was too ambitious. How do we know this promise isn't too ambitious?
Well, it's laid out in the long-term energy plan where we'll be getting the alternative sources of power from. That's why it's important to have a plan. That's why it's important to have a plan that you can bring out to Ontarians, allow Ontarian families to look at it, assess it, and see exactly where we're going. But let me go back to what this will mean to Ontario families. It'll mean cleaner air, without a doubt. It'll mean a healthier future for them and their kids. But just as importantly, the investments we're making in the clean energy economy are making Ontario a global clean energy powerhouse. That means thousands of jobs, Steve, across this province. We've already seen thousands of jobs come in already, but this making Ontario that clean energy global powerhouse is going to put our economy in very good stead moving forward into the future.
The McGuinty government can claim one big environmental success. Over the last few years, greenhouse gases produced by electricity generation have been cut in half. And by 2014, when the last of the province's coal generating plants is closed, the greenhouse gas reduction will be around 75%. But what the government would rather you not know is that this success has almost nothing to do with the Green Energy Act's push to build scores of new, spectacularly expensive, heavily subsidized wind farms and solar sites. The big win over pollution is instead coming from a cheap, old, proven technology, natural gas. And nobody's talking about the environmental downside of high electricity prices. How could expensive electricity be bad for the environment? Well, the next breakthrough in pollution reduction technology is expected to be the electric car. Problem: for clean electric vehicles to replace gasoline-powered ones, electricity has to be cheap. Cars and trucks are Ontario's largest and fastest-growing source of greenhouse gases, responsible for a third of the province's pollution. When it comes to generating electricity, in contrast, Ontario already has one of the world's least polluting power systems, because most of our electricity comes from zero-emission hydro and nuclear. As events in Japan this week show, there are other reasons to be concerned about the nuclear plants, but they emit no carbon, which is why Ontario's Green Plan does not call for shutting them down. As a result, by the time coal is phased out in 2014, only about 5% of Ontario's greenhouse gases will come from electricity. And yet, thanks to the Green Energy Act, government is obsessing, expensively and with great show, over that 5%.
I want to start just by way of setting up our discussion by putting a couple of graphics out here for us to look at. Taking a look at power output in the province of Ontario 10 years ago versus today. Here we go, 2003 roughly, when the Liberals started. We got, if we go around this clock here, 42% of our energy output via nuclear, 25% coal, 24% hydroelectric, oil and gas making up 8%. And look at that tiny little bit of renewables there at 1%. Fast forward to where we are about now, 2011, and look how this graphic has changed. We're cruising up towards 57% nuclear, hydro 22.2%, gas almost 15%, coal almost 3%, wind 2.6%, other 0.8%. What all this means is renewables have increased 240%. Gas is up almost 85%. Nuclear is up about a third. Hydro's down about 7.5%, and coal is down almost 90%. So, taken as a entire basket of goodies there, if you will, Tim, why don't you get us started? Altogether, has this been a positive change for Ontario's environment?
Yeah, I mean, this is the big thing that's going on, obviously, in Ontario that's exciting is the phase out of coal. And I mean, Ontario has really taken the bull by the horns and made that happen. And we need to be seeing a replication of what Ontario has done, not only in other parts of Canada, like here in Alberta, but also in the United States. And we know coal is by far the biggest problem when it comes to climate change, but there's also serious health concerns when it comes to mercury and respiratory issues and smog. And so getting rid of coal, it has been a big success. And Ontario really should be proud of the efforts that's been made there.
Deb, as you look at those numbers, some up, some down, on balance, better for Ontario's environment?
Absolutely. I agree with Tim 100%. I think the renewables quotient we'll see go up in the years to come because most of the projects that are in the pipeline to come online have contracts and they have yet to be built. So we'll see more renewables, and I think that's the next positive step for Ontario.
Paul, what's your view?
Well, I think the government has done a good job in achieving what they said they would achieve in terms of reducing the amount of CO2 and pollution release. So I think they deserve full credit for that.
Ross?
Well, I'm surprised that everybody's answering your question without quoting any numbers because we monitor air pollution in Ontario very closely. There's an air quality monitoring station in downtown Toronto that's been taking measurements since 1962. Going into that interval that you mentioned, air pollution in Ontario had already been coming down for decades, just with conventional pollution control measures. When the government did simulation studies on what would happen to smog levels as a result of closing down the coal-fired power plants, the numbers came back that it wouldn't make any real difference to ozone levels, which isn't surprising if you understand where ozone comes from in Ontario. And there'd be a very small effect on fine particulates. But on the rest of it, like carbon monoxide and NOx and sulfur dioxide, those were already controlled through other measures. So what we've seen since then is very little change in our air quality in Ontario, but we're starting from a level that was already very low. So the partial phase out of coal that's gone on so far hasn't made a difference in our air quality because we'd already made so much progress to that point.
Can I understand what you're saying here? You're saying going from a province that was reliant 25% on its energy mix on coal to where we are today, which is 2.7%, has virtually made no difference to our air quality?
Well, you can think about it this way. We get about 240,000 tons of fine particulate emissions in Ontario each year. This is information that's on the Environment Canada website. Up until, well, before the coal phase-out started, the coal plants would have contributed a couple of thousand tons of fine particulates. They're down to about 500 tons now. So it doesn't make any sense to think that that change is going to be showing up as a big effect on our air quality.
Let's get a little feedback to that utterly non-provocative statement you just made, shall we? Tim, come back on that if you would.
Well, I mean, part of this has to do, obviously, where the location of the coal plants were. You've got some of them out over the lake, and that's where some of the plumes would have ended up. But the bigger issue in my mind, and I think in most people's mind, is the phase out of coal is the single largest benefit that we've seen, or the single largest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that we've seen anywhere in Canada. And we know that coal is by far the leading problem when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and global warming around the world. And so that really is, that's, in my mind, the much bigger issue that we need to be dealing with, and that's the much bigger benefit. At the same time, reducing mercury and reducing air quality is obviously important, but these two things go hand in hand.
Deb, he seems to be saying that in spite of all of the promotion behind this greener economy, this greener form of creating energy, actually hasn't done that much, or something that wasn't happening anyway already. Right. What do you say?
Well, I would have to disagree with his assessment as to how much coal was contributing to poor air quality or GHG emissions. So I think regardless of whether there's worse emitters, whether it's cars or other sources in Ontario, phasing out coal is an important step in the right direction to cleaner air and mitigating climate change.
The government decides public policy. And if they want to reduce greenhouse gases, you do the math, the greenhouse gases have gone down. You can argue forever whether they should have or shouldn't have spent the money, but that was the policy, and they obviously had public support to spend some money to reduce greenhouse gases. There is a little problem, though, over the next couple of years that we haven't talked about yet, and that is we've got to the point now where we have serious problems in the spring and in the fall. We've got too much wind. Nuclear can't back off right now because they haven't put the engineering systems in to maneuver them, and they may have to shut nuclear down in a big way to make room for the wind because they have to take the wind under the current market rules. If that happens and they start shutting down nuclear over the next couple of years, we're going to have a huge increase in greenhouse gas emissions, which is counterintuitive, but the reason it happens is when the nuclear plant shuts down for 2 or 3 days, the next day for the peak, you've got to replace it with gas because the nuke is not there. And then you're burning a lot of CO2 to replace the nuclear. So over the next couple of years, if they don't change the market rules and force these turbines down, we're going to have the absolute reverse of what the government expected, which more wind, higher CO2 releases.
But Tim, let me get you to follow up then on what Paul was just telling us. Do you agree with the way Paul put this, that if we don't proceed, if we don't, I think basically what you're saying is we got to get lucky on the way these things roll out over the next couple of years.
The problem is the grid doesn't have any flexibility in the spring and in the fall because we never put in the engineering systems to get nuclear to back off when the new wind is coming on board. And so we're bringing wind on so fast that nuclear can't handle it. So they're going to have to shut them down. Once you shut those reactors down, they're out for 3 days. And then what do you do the next 2 days for the peak? You've got to replace it with gas. As soon as you start burning gas, the CO2 goes up.
Tim, do you share Paul's view that that is a potential scenario for the future staring us in the face here?
I mean, well, part of the problem is, in fact, the nuclear plants are as Paul said, they're not very flexible and they're difficult to manage in that way. But I think it's important to remember that this is a fairly temporary problem we're talking about here because a huge chunk of the Ontario nuclear fleet is about to be coming offline anyway. You know, there's refurbs that are required at Darlington. There's refurbs that are required at Bruce still. Pickering is on its way to be shut down entirely. So I think we need to keep a little bit of perspective here. These shutdown of nuclear is going to be happening, or at least refurb or rebuild is going to be happening in the very near future anyway. So I think we need to remember that this is, there is a bit of a problem right now because nuclear is inflexible, but it's a fairly temporary one.
The Green Energy Act took some decision-making powers away from municipal politicians and put them squarely in the hands of the province. We look now at a post-election debate. The Liberals lost seats in the 2011 election in key ridings where the Green Energy Act was ruffling feathers. Did this move lead to a backlash from rural Ontario and local interests? Let me read something off the top here from a group called Wind Concerns Ontario, which are not happy with the windmills going up all over the place. And they said each rural riding with an incumbent Liberal MPP was targeted, including those of Ministers Carol Mitchell, Leona Dombrowski, and John Wilkinson, and some were visited numerous times leading up to the election. In addition, WCO members worked also to provide support to existing incumbent PCs. The momentum and impact of Wind Concerns Ontario's work in these ridings was clearly responsible for the results. Let's get into that. Will Stewart, you used to be a chief of staff to a minister of energy,
yes.
Maybe a decade and a half ago. Are these folks right? Did they take down those 3 cabinet ministers?
I think it'd be very difficult to say that single-handedly they brought down those cabinet ministers, but I think it is fair to say that they certainly contributed to their downfall. And I don't think it was because they were rabble-rousing or being quoted in the local newspaper. What I actually think matters is in campaigns, people matter. And I think it motivated a group of people, namely farmers and others who didn't like to see wind turbines in their area for whatever reason, actually got out and onto the hustings. They handed out literature, they knocked on doors, they actually provided some of the sweat labor that makes campaigns run in Ontario. And I think that certainly contributed to it because they otherwise wouldn't have done that.
Paulino, how about you?
If you look at the difference between the 2007 and 2011 elections, the Liberal government lost 18 seats. 5 of those are in urban ridings, 3 are in the north, and 10, broadly speaking, were in rural areas across Ontario. And a number of those rural seats don't have wind turbines in them or proposed wind farms. I mean, it's reasonable to say that in a few of those ridings, there might have been a bit of a swing that came from the efforts of that group. But to make a blanket statement that all rural ridings were affected by this, I think is going a bit too far.
In that chair, Will, Monday night, sat Chris White from the Rural Ontario Institute. And he raised the idea that when it comes to energy policy in this province, there's a double standard. Watch this clip of that program and then we'll come back and talk. Michael, roll tape, please.
You look at the green legislation, for example, the Green Energy Act was a real divider out in rural Ontario. You had windmills going up that were problematic, pitting folks against folks, and there were different arguments about health and so on. But in Toronto, when you wanted to put some windmills off Scarborough, they were delayed. The gas plants in Mississauga and Oakville were both delayed or canceled. So you see a different response to different legislation coming out of the province.
Is there a double standard?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't see how anybody could conclude otherwise. And just to take one step back, and then I'll answer the question. Everyone's saying we don't need supply. Well, we don't need supply today, but people forget that in 2014, our main source of supply, 50% of our electricity in Ontario, goes offline for retrofit. The nuclear plants come down, and we've got to replace that 50% somehow. And if we don't start thinking about that now, in terms of gas plants or new nuclear, we're going to have big trouble. But there is a big divide in Ontario. And it's helpful when you look at a seat map, not to look at it in terms of red seats and blue seats, but think about it in terms of those who are less impacted by the economic downturn in Ontario and those more impacted by the economic downturn in Ontario. And I think that those outside of the 416 were more impacted by it. And I think that they voted Conservative for a series of reasons. Those within 416 and other urban centres voted Liberal for another reason. But I don't know how you can possibly conclude that there's not a double standard. Wind turbines, the people, local communities, local elected officials have no say in where wind turbines are sited. They have no say on when solar panels are sited. Yet inside of 416, if you can cause some pain for the government, if you can get your name in the newspaper, all of a sudden those plants come tumbling down.
Steve, double standard?
Kind of. There's another plant that we haven't mentioned. This is the Holland Marsh Peaker plant. I'm not sure whether it's in Newmarket, Aurora, or the riding just to the north of that, which I think is.
I think it's York North. I think it's Julia Monroe's riding.
Yeah,
it's a conservative held riding.
And it impacts Newmarket, Aurora, also conservative held. The local Farm Growers Association was not happy with that. They felt that got foisted on them, and that's another sort of thing that might have played in rural ridings where people might have sympathized with those farmers and seen how they were trampled on, or they felt that they had been trampled on, and that might have been another thing that sort of fed this rural backlash against the Liberals.
Double standard, Polino?
I would like to point out that there is a 1,000 megawatt electricity plant in downtown Toronto. It's the Portlands Energy Centre. It's right in the middle of the waterfront. There's a lovely high tower that's up above it. If you're in any building in downtown Toronto, you can see it. It's right there. I would also point out that the offshore wind turbines, yes, they were canceled when they're offshore of Toronto, but they were also canceled because of opposition in places like Sault Ste. Marie, where they didn't want to see offshore wind turbines up there either. So, I mean, it's just getting a little bit too easy to say that there's a difference between urban and rural, because Portland's Energy Centre did go ahead. And there was quite a bit of opposition in the city of Toronto that the government didn't pay attention to, because that plant was actually required. It was a necessity for local reliability. It went up.
I think there's opportunity in green energy everywhere, and I think as Haldimand County, we can play a significant role in the energy future. Where we fell in this whole process is we've had 4 large companies operate in silos. They apply to the Energy Board for their permits, they get their permits, rather than working together, not just with themselves, but with the county and with the people. That never really occurred. And so what we're seeing is, 4 large projects operating independently of each other, and that has an effect. I would have liked to have seen this staged, probably a few less windmills to start with, get people cultured with it, get them to understand that this can work within our environment, or if it can't work, then we're not so far down the pipeline.
Did you want a veto on the right to put them up?
Unfortunately, I don't think that would have made a difference. And the reason I say that is that if we were given the power to determine the future of these projects, they just would never happen. And the reason they would never have happened is that most municipal councils don't have the capability and the scope to be able to judge whether they're actually appropriate or not appropriate, and that's where we rely on the government.
Can I suggest something here? I think that one of the reasons why this originally came out as the province was essentially going to hold all the power in making those decisions was because the province recognizes the fact that the local government is a level of government that is so connected to the people that and I'll be the first to say it, we get hung up on issues from time to time and are not able to move forward. So when we hear that, you know, the issues that we don't have time and that we need to move forward quickly, I think that's why the province started off by saying, we'll hold all the power, we'll make the decisions.
They're the ones paying the big subsidies anyway.
Well, they are, but there is a level for the municipal government to play. The problem is when the Act was introduced, they didn't properly spell out exactly how that should happen. It took them time of going back over it and readjusting things. And now I think that they're starting to get somewhere that is in a comfortable place of getting some information and feedback from the municipality, putting timelines on that, and helping to move the process along. So, I mean, you know, as a local elected official, I totally agree that we need to have a role in that, but we can't let these issues get stuck on the municipal level, and then, you know, we end up, it's at the detriment of the whole province.
Let me put a map out here for a second, and then, Teresa, I'm going to get you to comment on this first. There's the province of Ontario. Look at the monitors in the studios, if you would, and you'll see, you know, some color coding here, and let's go into this just so we can understand what everything is. These yellow pins, that's where all of the approved solar projects are. Approved, not the ones proposed and so on. This is what's approved. The blue are wind, and you can see obviously most of them are pretty close to waterfronts. And then the green pins are the bioenergy projects. Again, there's lots of stuff in the hopper, but this is stuff that has been approved as renewable energy projects in the province of Ontario. Teresa, you first, then Keith, can you help us understand why those pins are where they are? Why we seem to see so much of one type in one place, so much of another type in another place?
Yeah, there are a couple of things going on. One is, where is the resource? So something like wind, you have to go where there's a good amount of wind throughout the year and not just seasonally. Another thing that's going on is access to the grid, and that's really important. Our transition system was built to be very centralized, and we have to figure out how to decentralize it and allow these projects access. And the third thing is, where's their expertise and opportunity in the community or with people who have the passion to pursue these projects, because they do take a lot of passion to get renewable projects going. So those are some of the explanations. And then of course, geographically, when someone sees something working, you know, the person in the next municipality may say, oh, I have an interest in that too. So you do see some aggregation that way as well.
Keith, can you follow up on that?
Yeah, I think we've seen wind can only go where it is really windy, and that tends to be near where there's water in this province.
And all year long.
Yeah.
Preferably.
And one of the good, interesting things about that diagram was, however, most of those generating sources were right near where we use the power. And that's actually a good thing. You actually want to generate the power close to where you use it rather than ship it long distances, because you lose a lot of energy along the way and you have to build new transmission lines and all this. Because we've traditionally tried to build the power plant sort of far away and then just ship the power down. It's hard to do that right now.
I want to take advantage of his being here for a second, because for those who don't know, your father's in the McGuinty government. He's the Attorney General of Ontario, and I want to be a fly on the wall of those conversations when you and your dad are talking, and you go up to your dad and say, you know, do you guys have to be so bloody ham-fisted about the way you communicate this policy, because you're making my life crazy? Do you have those conversations with your dad?
Absolutely. And yeah, I usually get my way, and if I don't, I bring Mom in.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.